Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Sterning with American Resiliency, here with a cross-model overview for the United States of America. We're living in a time of change, and I'm going to be using scientific resources that are now actively being hidden from the American public to help us understand some of the likely challenges coming to our homes and communities. We're going to look at how conditions are likely to change as we approach 2C along a standard warming model. Now, for what that means, we're around 1.5C now, which is a point we were not projected to hit until the 2030s. So those 2C projections are one model in this cross-model overview. The other is going to look at projected changes to the U.S. in the event of major phase change events in the world's oceans, which we are seeing observational evidence coming in that is probably happening now. The complexity of our unfolding change landscape means that we're entering a time of uncertainty. I hope the risk spread I'll be presenting in this video will help you build resilience in this time of change. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but so far, the areas where emerging risks have been projected, like extreme heat or flooding rain, in the National Climate Assessment, those NCA 5 predictions have been pretty spot on at 1.5C. So the first thing we're going to look at in this overview is projected changes in summer heat as we approach 2C. And for that, we need some tools. Those were once publicly available through a .gov site with the NCA 5 Atlas. That's a resource you paid for. The AR team has created a couple of visualization engines using those same once easily accessible, publicly available data sets. We're going to use Jackie Ryan's visualization today, and let's go find it here at AmericanResiliency.org. Go click the Resources tab and look at the Jackie Pie link. If you want access to any edition of the National Climate Assessment, to those reports, to those figures, or to these visualization engines, just go to our website, AmericanResiliency.org. We've got information here that belongs to the American public, and our team here at AR is working hard to keep this information accessible to you so you can choose if you want to use this information to make decisions about your future. You'll notice that Jackie's tool here doesn't cover Alaska or Hawaii. This video is going to cover all 50 states. We'll take a look at Hawaii first and then Alaska as we transition between the threads of this weaving I'm going to make for you here, which will help us build up a clearer picture of the complex change landscape as we step through this video. Let's begin with this heat change landscape for the continental US. And as we do that, with this color key, think about that we're working metal, okay? Black is cool, white is white hot. The way projected heat increases are laid out here is going to be in layers, which let's zoom out a little bit. And I want you to see that to get the heat increase projected for your county, you're going to want to add days over 95, days over 100, and days over 105. Let's get started with this high-end heat, days over 105. So remembering that we're working metal with white is white hot, we see Southern California, Southern Arizona, and Clark County, Nevada are looking white hot with long extensions projected for high-end heat as we approach 2C. Maricopa County, you're looking at a month of additional days over 105, and I hear the last couple of years, the longer summer has been very noticeable, as well as the extremely high nighttime lows, sometimes coming in at nighttime lows over 100. Other areas where dangerous extensions in high-end heat are projected are throughout California's Central Valley and all up through what some folks are calling Heat Alley, where you can see high-end heat shooting up through Texas in a curve along the Great Plains all the way up to Canada. Texas, western Oklahoma, and western Kansas are being smacked the worst. In other areas, the increased heat is more likely to stay within adaptation range. We're also seeing a handful of 105 plus days, a blush of red projected in eastern Washington, southern Idaho, including around Boise, and in some areas where the humid climate may make this emerging high-end heat particularly serious. In the southeast there, we can see a few more really hot days emerging. These very hot and humid conditions are not unusual for the southeast, but Arkansas, Missouri, and parts of southern Iowa and western Illinois are looking at a few days each summer that will be a real departure from their local norms. Making plans for resilient cooling for people and livestock is going to be very important for community well-being as we approach 2C. So 105 plus, that's the scary heat. Let's dial this down to the number of days over 95. Here you can see that much of the nation is looking at increased discomfort, even if we're not talking about that scary 105 plus heat. And a 95-degree day in a humid climate is not pleasant and can be dangerous for people, particularly seniors, very young, and people with heart and lung conditions. Unfortunately, you can see that basically across the US, the 2C future looks sweaty. There's the unusual hot spot. You'll see the only white on this map projected is for central Florida. There, it's not likely to go over 105, but it's going to be between 95 and 100 for an extra 40 days every summer by 2C. That is not my cup of tea. For a lot of folks in the Southeast, that's the nature of the warming that is in the projections for you. Not a lot hotter than it is on the hottest days now, but the same amount of hotter for a lot longer. If you're in the South right now, we just finished up July. Thinking towards 2C, you want to be thinking about what it would feel like to your body if you had an extra month of July temps packed into the calendar every year and how you would respond to that. I, for one, would want a resilient cooling plan with some backup power and also normalize lazing around more during the day. If we want to build up to the level of siesta we're going to want by 2C, it's time to start setting expectations now. Maybe revive the fainting couch. It is the perfect regional furniture for calamitous conditions. The federal reports are always all up in arms about the anticipated loss of productivity from the Southeast in this warming scenario. But really, it's like, oh no, we've all been so enjoying our ever-increasing productivity levels. But let's focus in on the dark areas of this map. Where is it staying relatively cool, more in normal character for the region? Right along the Pacific coast, with the notable exception of LA County, we see pretty good cool preservation. Other place on the coast there, on the Pacific coast, where we see some unusual warming is California's Central Coast, which is my favorite place in California with such unique and beautiful life forms. So this projection info really grinds my gears. Western Washington and Western Oregon look relatively low change until you start getting into the Cascades, where I am sorry to say we are seeing some significant heat increases and, more importantly, precipitation changes in the projections, with major projected snowpack changes in the Cascades. On the East Coast, you can see the Northeast is the least impacted region of our country by extreme heat, which is great. That's really nice to see. Especially once you get inland a little bit in the East, the Northeast has just great overall resilience potential at 2C. Appalachia also provides a spine of strength. I'm very interested particularly in the overall resilience potential of northern Appalachia. Once we're starting to look around West Virginia, it looks really strong. And in the center of the country, the northern Midwest is not looking bad. In Wisconsin, there's a lot of small dairy, heritage dairy operations, and those traditional heritage cattle, they need a fairly cool summer. I was born in the Chicago area, so I don't know. To me, the fact that Wisconsin is likely to keep churning out cheese and beer at 2C, it's a big cultural comfort to me. In a lot of the Midwest, access to cheese curds is basically our core emotional resilience strategy. So you can take a deep breath and let it out, Midwesterners. All right, it's transition time. And this transition, Alaska is the star of the show. Why am I talking about Alaska in the context of extreme summer heat? Don't worry, it's not because Alaska has days over 95 projected. It's because Alaska doesn't have any dangerous daytime heat increases projected. Now, don't get me wrong. In Alaska, especially, there's a lot of room for it to be weirdly, damagingly hot below 95. But if you're an individual whose main concern in this warming future is wet bulb temperatures, Alaska is in the clear. And I'd like everyone to notice here on this sub-figure to the right, here in figure 2.11 from the NCA 5, the projected increases nationwide in nighttime lows. So that's over here, and everybody in a red zone is looking at a substantial increase in nighttime lows, like another month where it's not going to cool off below 70 at night as we approach 2C. So, this whole area that extends from Texas to the East Coast, you're going to have increased power demands 24/7 in the hot season. We're talking about potentially big increases in energy demand. Now, here's where we're going to change threads for this weaving and leave heat behind for a while. All across the country, we're seeing extreme storms emerge. Storms that cause flooding, where the water rises quickly, where even with as much warning as you can get, you don't have enough time to pack out your things. When you get the warning, you have to get out. And that's one of my big concerns for Alaska. And we'll look at the figure in just a minute. But I don't want to understate, the level of winter change is also concerning. Alaska is projected to see continuing dramatic changes to the cold season with a much milder winter, which is going to be hard on the landscape. I'm also very concerned about the changes to marine ecosystems and how that will impact Alaska's food systems, lifeways, and commercial fisheries. But the extreme rain is probably the most dangerous change for Alaska in the projections, even with that big risk grab bag. As you can see here in figure 2.12, the intensity of rain on the worst days, your 1% worst days on the top left there, Alaska's risk far exceeds anything projected for the rest of the U.S. When they're making new colors for you on the map, that's not a good sign, Alaska. In Alaska, the top resilience concerns related to this extreme precipitation are complex. The way the winters are changing, I know you've been getting more ice, more layered ice over snow. Anyone who's been in an ice storm should be getting the heebie-jeebies just thinking about clearing layered ice. An extreme deluge-type precipitation event falling as ice is a very concerning event to consider for central Alaska. The extreme precipitation projected throughout the state is likely to cause riverine flooding and erosion, both to pretty serious degrees that could threaten riverside communities. Alaska's high change. High risk, potentially high reward. Boring person from Iowa. To me, Alaska's change profile is too extreme. But many people are drawn to Alaska because it's always been high risk, high reward. In the future, those stakes are just going to get higher on both ends. But let's talk about this figure 2.12 and look at precipitation trends for the rest of the nation, focusing first on this deluge-type rain, which we're beginning to understand is a major infrastructure threat. There are areas of overlapping concern, areas that light up on all three of these subfigures in western Michigan, northern Minnesota, northern Maine, southern Appalachia, Texas near DFW, southwest Nevada, and around Bakersfield, California. Where you're seeing overlapping yellow-brown signals emerge across all three subfigures on this map, that's where you want to be if you're looking to avoid serious deluge-type rain in these projections as you make decisions about your future. I have to say, the cluster over Bakersfield is so strong, and that's the one that concerns me the most. It's the worst deluge cluster that we haven't yet seen signs of materialization, and I sure hope it doesn't come to pass. But every other cluster area has started to light up with deluge-type rain. I hate looking at the Bakersfield cluster on these figures because that's a lot of your more affordable housing in California right there under the deluge cluster. There are so many vulnerable people under there who would struggle to recover from that hit should it come. When we're talking about this figure 2.12, we're talking about high intensity rain, but I think we also want to look at overall precipitation trends. Let's go over to figure 2.10 for that because, well, generally speaking, we don't want like a flooding rain. We need rain in this figure. Over in the top right, you can see projected overall precipitation trends at 2C. Let's zoom in a little bit. So zoomed in a little bit here, looking from 1.5C to 2C, you can see that the drought trend for the Southwest continues, but maybe it will not be quite as crushingly severe as it has been at 1.5C for southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. And we see some potential for increased precipitation in these projections for the Northwest. There's a little dark spot you'll see there emerging between 1.5 and 2C over the Columbia River watershed around Spokane, which does not stand out for deluge-type rains. That's good sign, Spokane. I sure hope you all get kindly rains through that watershed. good, kindly rains throughout the Northwest as we approach 2C. Although you are seeing increased heat, where you also see increased rain, there's a better chance at meeting more of the increased water needs of the landscape. You can see the Midwest and the Northeast are looking fairly dark on that 2C figure. We see a fair amount more precipitation in the outlook towards 2C, looking at statistically significant about 10% more rain. So building resilience that accounts for water, thinking about how water moves over the landscape, thinking about storing water for summer droughts that are becoming more prolonged and intense. These are all very important resilience strategies for both the Midwest and the Northeast. Mentioning drought there, I'm pulling up the current drought monitor report where we can see how the western half of the country is experiencing very serious drought trends. I want, though, to focus a bit on Hawaii. And we can see here that Hawaii has been experiencing a fairly serious multi-year drought trend. When we look back at the projections, we see that there should be, as expected, a drought trend at 1.5C. But if you look over at 2C here, more of the island is projected to move further out of drought as we move towards 2C. So while that's potentially good news, if drought trends are going to diminish, I want us to note that we're looking very dark on the precipitation's extreme figures for Hawaii, across figures darker than the national average, indicating that more of that rain you're likely to get may come as serious deluges. In any mountainous area, flooding rain, extreme rain, is a serious potential danger. Popping back up figure 2.11, we can see that Hawaii is not expecting many more very warm days in the outlook, very few additional days over 95. But we are looking at a fairly substantial change in warm nights across the islands. So that warming trend is definitely not as scary as it could be for Hawaii. You're staying within temperature tolerances for a lot of great plants, but we're talking about a warming trend that is going to impact health at the community level. And when we think about community health, that deluge-type rain could have negative impacts on community water sources. You can get pollution spreading with flooding-type rains, and you can get more pools of stagnant water where disease-carrying mosquitoes can multiply. As a bird nerd who is aware of the devastating impacts of avian malaria on Hawaii's precious, culturally significant and rare birds, the fact that we're looking at more mosquito problems in the future is an issue that has impacts well beyond human health. This is an issue that has impacts on other beloved life forms. So, folks, we introduced extreme precipitation with Alaska, and with Hawaii, we're going to introduce the third thread in this weaving. We've looked at extreme high-end heat increases. We've looked at changes to precipitation. Now it's time to look at sea level rise as we build up our picture of the national change landscape. I think that when we're talking about islands and island nations, we have this cultural notion, this disaster movie type notion that they are all going to sink beneath the waves. Check this out. So here we are in my favorite .org sea level rise visualization tool. This is in the resources tab of our website. So here we are in Hawaii. Let's look up to 10 feet of sea level rise. Let's look at like a generational planning scope type figure. So everywhere we see red on this map is where we're looking at potential inundation. I think that you could see, even from a bird's eye view, that Honolulu is the worst impacted area by sea level rise in these projections. But let's cruise around a little bit, because I, for one, was a little bit surprised by how enormously resilient Hawaii looks to sea level rise. So there are areas, even in Hawaii, that are going to be significantly impacted, and that's at 10 feet, which we don't expect 10 feet to come in the next year, but you may be aware that coast is like a popular place. So we're going to keep looking at 10 feet because the type of retreat we need to do nationally in the face of sea level rise, we could use some time to do it. All right, so popping back up on the screen here, Island Hawaii, hilariously unexciting at 10 feet from this view. I assure you, there are many places that look really bad at 10 feet, such as most of the continental U.S.'s east coast. We'll go over there in a minute. For all of the islands, focusing on what are the impacts to the islands, because while you look resilient, I don't want to minimize the fact that there are impacts. We're going to see changes to the beaches. and we're potentially going to see salt water moving into freshwater aquifers. Many of Hawaii's aquifers are already threatened by old, unregulated cesspits that are just hanging out being disgusting. So this additional aquifer threat is a pretty serious resilience priority. Across Hawaii, if you can get your drinking water very stable, if you have plans to store water when it's abundant, if you think about how flooding rain may move over the landscape, I think you have some important strength. But this comes alongside a great warning, because Hawaii and many other places that love the ocean, you're not just land, you're land and sea. And projected changes to the sea are not just sea level rise. There are changes to the great life in the ocean. The projections include a major loss of life in the ocean, particularly the Pacific Ocean. Land-based food systems are especially important for Hawaii's future resilience, and salt-tolerant traditional crops like taro could help provide meaningful resilience in this changing world. And I want to reiterate that this is a warning that should be heard by all our friends on the Pacific Coast. And there could be many communities, like an arch of stars in the night, dotting the Pacific Coast, so far out as my mind can see. It is important that all of you who dream that dream of a generational future take in this warning. The sea is not likely to continue to yield the diverse abundance that has sustained coastal communities for thousands of years. We will feel the loss and the change of life in the sea. All right, sea level rise. In what may have been a surprise to many of us, not Hawaii's biggest problem. Let's go see where it is a problem. We're looking away from the West Coast for a minute. We're taking a look at the Gulf and the East Coast, which is where we see a lot of red on the map. This is where we see the most damage to the built environment projected in sea level rise scenarios. And this is a big issue as we build up our picture of the national change landscape, because we're looking at a future where people are going to want to move. As we may already be aware, many people are not freaked out by super extreme heat. They just stay in the air conditioning. That's what people do in Phoenix and Las Vegas today. Big storms, extreme rains, that other major threat to life and well-being. There's a certain amount of built environment adaptation you can do with those extreme rains, especially if you have a good valuing and visualization of high ground and you stay way out of the floodplain. More than any other factor, I think sea level rise is going to drive population movement, because it's very hard to cohabit right in your house with the sea. The sea does not negotiate, and I get the impression the sea may be pretty mad at us for fairly obvious reasons. Sea level rise could make your home uninhabitable for reasons beyond entering your living room. Sea level rise is going to have impacts on infrastructure. You might want to watch the Delaware state level video if you're interested in that. We've got infrastructure built with materials that aren't salt rated along the eastern seaboard that are going to start getting hit by salt. Sea level rise, like I mentioned, related to Hawaii, can get into the groundwater, can put salt into your water sources, and can get salt into the soil, limiting the crops you can grow. When we look at where the U.S. is expecting the most direct damage and the most potential population push from sea level rise, two areas stand out. The Gulf Coast, particularly around Texas and Louisiana, and this is like the really worst part, let's zoom in, is this densely populated part of the eastern seaboard. We've got Norfolk, Virginia, down at the bottom of the screen there. The Department of Defense has been concerned about sea level rise at the important military base there for some time. You can also see there's some red on this map around D.C., and that it looks quite striking around New Jersey and New York City. Now, again, we are visualizing 10 feet here, which we're not going to expect to see tomorrow. And if you're a person who's more concerned about when should I pull out of my location, if you live near a coast, I'd suggest keeping an eye on Atlantic City in New Jersey. Atlantic City is about the most vulnerable city in America to sea level rise. At 1 foot of sea level rise, they expect to see considerable land loss and damage to the built environment. When Atlantic City starts getting shaky, if I was a coastal person who didn't want to leave the beach before I felt it was necessary, if I had a more conservative mindset about the sea level rise issue, kind of a wait and see mindset, Atlantic City would be my recommended action trigger. Looking for a second, right down in DC, a lot of the first damage from sea level rise will be to the National Mall and to especially the underground structures of the Smithsonian buildings. That's going to have an impact on our national psyche, on the way we understand ourselves. And looking up to our financial capital, up towards New York City, we see a whole different level of damage. All that red is inundation. That's where the water is going to be in like all the time at this level of sea level rise. Look at poor Newark. And you can see the southern coast of Long Island is also going to get hit hard. We expect to lose most of the airports as well as seeing saltwater impacts on major bridges and highways from Delaware to Massachusetts. Like I told you all, the ocean looks mad. I look at this and some part of me is like, whoa, check out how the ocean is attacking major polluting infrastructure. Kind of reminds me of the killer whales out there sinking yachts, but on like a continental scale. Getting down into the Gulf, we can see that the land loss projected for Louisiana is quite extensive. Baton Rouge is a place where I see important resilience potential emerging. Baton Rouge has a deep water port. We can see that in this changed landscape, Baton Rouge could emerge as a major ocean port. The long-term outlook for New Orleans, as we can see here, is not good. I was in New Orleans at the time of Katrina and for the recovery, and I love this city and the spirit of that city very much. The thought of losing New Orleans, we'd lose something important to the soul of America. But I do believe that no matter if this sad fate should come to pass, the spirit of New Orleans will live on. I find it of considerable interest that around the time when New Orleans is likely to go beneath the water, that New York will have experienced a level of change where the city will feel more like a classical New Orleans climate, that far north, a classical New Orleans climate. If you had a flat-bottomed punt boat, a pirogue, that would be a good way to get around the margins of what New York is likely to become by the time I'm in my age. Could poke around and find some stuff. Now, all this speculation is if New York doesn't build a seawall, of course. That's not exactly a new technology. The Dutch have been working the edges on holding margins against the sea for hundreds of years. Though I have heard that many factors work against the possibility of a New York City seawall, including the particular geologic structures underlying the Hudson River. But thinking about seawalls, if we want to look at one area where people have a particularly important decision to make about the sea, let's zoom over to the West Coast. We're going to check out the Bay Area. Now, here's another place where we're talking about impacts to very expensive developed land. At 10 feet, our long-range outlook, you can see that not only do we lose a lot of land in the Bay Area, the water starts spilling into the Central Valley. That happens around 7 feet of sea level rise. We lose land in the Bay Area starting at 1 foot. It gets to be kind of an intense amount of real estate by 3 feet. It's not as bad as the damage on the East Coast, but many people in the Bay Area, they're not really interested in relative damages. They're interested in what's happening there, right? So all of that water, and that water there's the potential to flood the Central Valley with salt water, is moving through the Golden Gate. That's a pretty wild place as far as currents go, but it's small. It's a narrow gap. I wonder what people will do. If they'll embrace change or they'll put off the day of the flood. We're going to find out. Rest of the West Coast, as far as sea level rise goes, West Coast is the best coast. There's damage expected, of course, but it's just not on the scale of the East Coast. Los Angeles is looking at losing the beaches pretty bad, and we also see damage to the San Diego harbor. Like, check this out. Seattle, even at 10 feet, pretty cute. You're in adaptation range. And it's really a matter of the local geography because this is sad. When we check out Vancouver, up a little north of you, you can see a tremendous amount of the built environment is going to be directly impacted by sea level rise. Further up north, both Juneau and Anchorage are looking like they have fairly strong resilience potential to sea level rise. Like we talked about before, Alaska's got other stuff to worry about, but on this particular factor, you look pretty steady, which is nice to see. And before I move away from the West Coast, while we're talking about sea level rise, I feel like I need to touch on earthquakes. Over the last few years, I've come to understand more about how earthquakes and these projected changes in climate connect. There's surprising agreement among seismologists, among earthquake scientists, that if we see sea level rise speed up, we're going to see more earthquakes, particularly along the Ring of Fire all around the Pacific. I know people on the West Coast are earthquake aware. I hope that if you're concerned about these interlocking trends, you're also earthquake prepared. A major earthquake, say if we end up experiencing the big Cascadia subduction zone rip in our lifetimes, is a scenario where many communities on the West Coast would be cut off from outside help, most likely for what could be some months. Okay, so I want to talk more about why I'm using the 10-foot modeling for the coasts, planning purposes, yes, and also because many of the best understood tipping points in Earth's climate systems, which we are clearly brushing against, would drive higher end sea level rise faster. If we see a big shift in the world's ocean currents, which would be driven by changes in salinity, which is the heart of the findings in this observational paper, which has made the rounds quite a bit, is observed changes in salinity. We would expect to see in these related scenarios further acceleration in Antarctic melting. So let's show a little modeling, and this isn't as high fidelity as the 2C projections for what changes we would expect to the land here in North America beyond sea level rise acceleration if we get those big changes in ocean systems. I think it's very important that all of us understand that this is not a straightforward change process. It's not like we're changing tracks on a trolley problem. Warming won't stop if we hit the tipping point that causes phase change states in the world's ocean currents. We'll see the trends that we just talked about earlier in this video push against the new trends we're going to talk about, causing big shifts and wild weather changes from year to year, which does sound kind of like what's happening to me. So here's some visuals for that other change trend, the tipping point trend. We would expect a mild drought trend across most of the U.S., with exceptions in the Pacific Northwest and in the heart of Appalachia. We would expect to see a cooling trend that might offset some of the warming trend. We see a cooling trend projected for the northern hemisphere in the case of this sort of ocean current phase change. This cooling trend would be most pronounced as you get north. That might be good. It's not so severe that it would push us beyond current norms. It might help preserve snowpack and snowpack-fed water systems. It might help the trees in the north survive. So this push and pull of drought and deluge, this push and pull of hot and cold, that gives us some context for understanding the lower of those two subfigures. And particularly the one in the lower right-hand corner, which is about changes in wind velocity potential. If we have hit this tipping point where changes to the world's ocean are occurring, we would be expecting more extreme wind events in the southeast and really pretty well up the east coast. There would be an increase in wind velocity potential across the country, but the southeast is where that increase in wind velocity would be the most pronounced. So looking at these two change trends, 2C and tipping point, as we try to build an understanding of possible futures and how we might respond, it does let us identify emerging risks for our communities. For some places, extreme heat will be the resilience priority. For many places, we're going to want to think hard about how water moves over the landscape, be ready for flooding rains, and I think it's worth considering wind resilience as well. It's a lot easier to have a roof that doesn't need work anytime a big windstorm comes. And in the winter, we do expect to see polar vortex activity. We do expect to see occasional hard freezes pretty far south, even in the context of a warming world. So it's like, dang, it's a lot of hazards. An all-hazards approach to resilience, a general hardening, building more give into your household and community systems, is a good way to respond to this level and spread of change. And when we look at America in a global context, both in a conventional warming scenario and a tipping point scenario, here's a hard reality. We look really good. I'm going to show you some evidence of that in this figure from an IPCC report. At 2C, North America is looking at our tourism industry getting shaky. If you look at those figures nearby, you'll see that Africa and Europe are looking at people losing access to water and food at the same level of warming. You've seen yourself in this video. We're facing a lot of challenges. but more of our country is in adaptation range than most places. Less of our population lives in areas highly vulnerable to sea level rise than on most continents, particularly Southeast Asia. These futures I'm modeling are hard futures. There's no cakewalk anywhere. But the work we do to build resilience, I believe it's going to matter. We need to be putting on our own oxygen masks first because it's very important that America be able to remain strong, a strong global food exporter. Some nations are projected to lose much of their agricultural potential by 2C. Our 2C agricultural outlook, well high change, well challenging, keeps a whole lot of our agricultural land in play. If you're interested in food systems, the National Food Systems Overview will be out in a few weeks. Thanks for spending some time learning with me. If you want to learn more, you should check out the regional cross-model outlooks, and you can also get detailed state-level projections for a 2C scenario here on the channel. A top-down response to this level of change is not going to be enough, and it's not coming. To bring our best possible future into being, we need to be building resilience from the ground up as well. Here at AR, we've developed some resources for reasonable preparedness in this time of change and uncertainty. I would check out the AR video titled What is Reasonable Prep? Look for the 25 update, and also look for the resilience workshop resources we've created for anyone who likes a nice clear checklist to go through. The work we're doing in our communities in this time of change matters. AR wants to be on your side, on your resilience journey. We offer resilience workshops, outlook services, and materials to help volunteers develop resilience for local food systems, water systems, and community connections. There's a lot of work to do. I encourage you to take one step today, and I'll look forward to talking with you all again soon. Folks, thanks for staying with me. That was a long one. I want to thank the AR community for making this work possible. Our donors, our volunteers, people spreading the word online, and especially people doing the work on the ground. AR is a 501c3. Our work is 100% donor supported. If you'd like to contribute, check out the links on our YouTube channel or on our website, americanresiliency.org. I'm wishing you all the best, and I hope AR is the place where you find the resources you need in these times of change.